everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Loudwire podcast. I'm Graham.
I'm Joe.
And we've got a one-inclusive twofer.
What's that mean? Graham, tell him.
It means that we have not one, but two guests simultaneously.
Wow.
How about that? First up, the founder of Metal Blade Records, lifelong metalhead, one of the most important people in our little world, Brian Slagel. And accompanying him is Trevor Strnad of the Black Dahlia murder. So we have a stacked podcast for you today.
A little bit of a bonus treat there for you.
For sure.
So Brian Slagel has a book out right now. It's called For the Sake of Heaviness. It explores 35-year history of Metal Blade Records, all the way back from when he was a local promoter just trying to get shows going, started his own label, working out of his mom's garage, just like every good success story begins, working out of a garage, and built everything up from there. And one thing that when you ever hear anybody talk about Brian Slagel, it's about his character.
Yes.
It's that he's a laid-back guy, he loves what he does, and he will put his neck out for every one of his bands, and he will only sign what he likes. So this book takes you through the entire history of what happened with the label, how it grew to the size that it was today. He signed important bands like Slayer. He's had a heavier involvement in Metallica than most of you might even realize, even if you know that he's kind of responsible for Metallica even getting together in the first place and releasing one of the recordings.
He absolutely is.
Yeah. And even during the 90s, he didn't have to worry about it too much with the metal fallout and stayed into the underground with a lot of the death metal that was happening, the extreme scene. And then, of course, a huge success story in the modern era, the new millennium. Bands like Black Dahlia Murder, As I Lay Dying, at the kind of that new wave of American heavy metal, as a lot of people call it. And into a little bit of the future. Everybody's streaming music now. So we're going to tackle all those aspects here in the podcast.
And also, if you're wondering what the hell's up with Mercyful Fate and King Diamond, what they've got planned, Brian has a pretty good answer for all of your queries.
And if you know, King Diamond's been talking about putting out a DVD for years and years and years now. He's always said that he's still working on it. I've never doubted him that he's not working on it because I think he wants this thing to be immaculate. And from what we learned, sounds like it's going to be.
It's a coming.
And you might have heard Mercyful Fate have one album left on their deal with Metal Blade. What's going on there? We wondered too.
Yeah, plenty to talk about. Here it is right now. Trevor Strnad, Brian Slagel, get ready to sit down.
And shout! Everyone, welcome to another episode of the Loudwire podcast. And we've got two very awesome guests for you today, both in each side of the metal world. We have founder, CEO, and Chief Awesomeness at Metal Blade, Brian Slagel, and of course, Trevor Strnad from the Black Dahlia murder. So thank you guys so much for coming on the podcast. Really excited to talk to both of you guys today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, man, thanks a lot.
So, Brian, you've got a book out, For the Sake of Heaviness, and you're like the first metal guy who's written a book on his experience. You've got a lot of the rock guys who've been around forever since the 60s, 70s, but this is the first one where we really get to see a lot of what's going on in the metal world, really starting with the 80s. And one thing that I feel like a lot of people know about you is, of course, that you released the first Metallica recording. You had the Metal Massacre and compilation, and you kind of got those guys together. But when I was reading, what I didn't know is that you had actually recommended not only Cliff Burton to them, but also Jason Newsted after Cliff had passed.
Yeah, I was the Metallica bass player finder, I guess. Well, the Cliff Burton story is kind of interesting because same thing, like Lars just came to me and I've been friends with him since he was 16 and I was 18 for forever. So he said, hey, we need a bass player. You know anybody? And we had this band Trauma that was on Metal Massacre 2 that had played in LA, I don't know, maybe a month before. He asked me that question and the band wasn't that great, but the bass player was amazing. It was Cliff. So I said, yeah, there's a band from San Francisco playing here in a couple of weeks. You should come see them. This band, has an amazing bass player. So sure enough, James and Lars came down and we're at the show. And I don't know, 50 minutes in, Lars said, that's going to be our new bass player. I'm like, all right, sure, Lars.
Go for it.
Yeah, and the same thing with, with Newstead. He was in Flotsam and when they asked me about that, I
love
go,
Doomsday.
He would. I know. So that was really conflicting for me because we had this band that was really amazing, and we put out their record. And it was doing really well, and Jason was Flotsam. He wrote
he's
everything.
The primary
he was
songwriter.
main guy. But I also knew he'd be perfect for Metallica. So it's like, for the greater good, I guess. And he ended up being the bass player there.
Yeah, and that's kind of been your reputation in the metal scene, is just for the greater good of metal.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's what it's all about. I mean, I love the music, I love the genre. Anything I can do to help, whether it's helping bands or helping other bands that aren't even on a label. I have so many other friends and stuff. So yeah, it's all for the big picture, as they say.
Yeah. Now, you didn't get to pick Robert Trujillo. Did you have any recommendations after Newsted left the band?
Well, at that point, I didn't really. I wasn't. I mean, they had kind of. I think at that point they kind of knew where they wanted to go. So we spoke a little bit about it, and they mentioned Robert. I'm like, that's a no-brainer. So, and he's a great guy. We all knew him. So they had auditioned a lot of guys. So I think I might have thrown a couple of people out there. But when they mentioned Robert, I go, I mean, you can go through the rigmarole of auditioning other people, but he's the guy. So
Yeah.
still a lot of
Now, Trevor, what was something else that you learned while reading this book?
Just about like a lot of the stuff you did in the early days, promoting shows and stuff like that. I had no idea about that. And radio as well. Didn't know you were coming from that background.
Yeah, you
Just like how many hats you were wearing around that time
I know.
was freaking insane.
Man with
dude.
1,000 hats.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too with the early LA scene, and it was kind of like a little bit of the glam. You even had a shot at getting Motley Crue on the Metal Massacre.
Yeah, they were going to be on, and then
yeah,
I ended up giving them to a distributor, and then for the record, and then that was the end of that.
yeah, and then you broke a little bit of the new wave of British heavy metal scene in that area too.
Yeah, just working in the record store, we sold a lot of that thing. I was just so into the music, whatever I could do to help, I was doing everything. Yeah, radio. I was helping the radio station, doing a fanzine, booking shows, working at the record stores.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And then the 90s came around, and I know, Trevor, you're a huge death metal fan. I'm sure we could do a 5-hour podcast talking about Demilich
At
and
least.
stuff like that. But Brian, you signed Cannibal Corpse to a 7-album deal right out of the gate. What made you want to lock them up for that much time?
I think that was kind of where the industry was at that point. Like everybody's doing long-term deals. If you're going to sign somebody, it was so difficult to develop them. You did long-term deals, and we loved the band. I mean, I literally saw that demo tape, and it said "A Skull Full of Maggots" is one of the song titles. I said, I don't really care if this is any good. We're going to sign it just because
The
of that
shock
song
value
title.
is there. The perfect metal.
Just that song title's so great, but luckily it was good. So yeah, we ended up signing. So yeah, I think because that was the time we were with Warner's, and because we were at Warner's, we had to sign all of our bands to these long deals, even though Cannibal wasn't part of the Warner's deal. It's kind of in our deal that you had to do these long-term things because at some point, if we'd stay with Warner for a long time and Cannibal did really well, then they would want to have them. And that was kind of one of the major label things of you've got to sign these long deals.
So you test the water a little bit with maybe the first 1, 2, 3 records, and then if they start to blow up from there,
Pretty
then they know
much.
that they've got a hot commodity locked up for a long time.
Cannibal is interesting because everything else we had was going through the Warner distribution system, but we thought Cannibal Corpse was a little too crazy for that, so they went through
Understandable.
independent. Yeah, yeah, I think that was a good decision.
Now, how much? What was the album deal for Black Dahlia Murder?
4 at first.
Either 4 or 5. I
Then
can't
we
remember.
negotiated again, and then now
Yeah.
we've re-signed a few times.
Yeah.
'Cause you guys are lifers.
Yeah. I mean,
both you and Cannibal are lifers on
Yeah,
Metal
yeah.
Blade, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We got a few of those. Guar had their little
Stint,
turn at
right?
for a minute.
Yeah, I remember I did an interview back in college radio with Dave Brocky, and he was even saying, he was in the Odorous character, and he was saying how much they messed up moving away from Metal Blade.
And you do mention Guar in the book, especially an incident that happened with the song Baby Dick Fuck, of course, that I think it was Warner that didn't want to put that out.
They didn't want
that,
the song on
that
the
was
album.
right after the whole Ice-T thing happened when we was a Body Count and Cop Killer. So after that, Warner's was in this big, and Warner's had just been bought by this huge company, so it's this huge corporation now. And so they were eventually, after the whole Cop Killer thing happened, they actually they had a lawyer there whose job was to go through and look at every record being released through the WIA system and figure out if the lyrics were okay for the Time Warner Inc. company. And the first record we gave them was Guar, and they came back and they said, "Okay, we can put this out, but you have to take this song off, maybe, and you have to change the lyrics in this song." I'm like, "Wait a minute, what now?" And so I went to the band. I'm like, "I'm not gonna." like, this is what they want you to do. I'm not going to force you to do it. And they said, we don't want to do it. And that kind of led to us leaving Warner's.
Yeah. Now, Trevor, have Black Dahlia Murder faced any weird kind of protest? A lot of bands are getting protested for really stupid things these days. Is there anything like that where Brian's gone to bat?
We've been pretty lucky. I mean, you'll see bands that get shut out of the shows in Anaheim. You'll see stuff happening in Russia and Poland sometimes with obscenity charges on like satanic stuff. But we've been pretty lucky to fly under that radar, and I think it's such a crowded genre with so many bands breaking these rules all at once. It's kind of hard to police, I think.
Definitely.
But it's a whole different time as far as shock value now than it was, even 20 years ago in metal.
It almost seems non-existent.
Yeah, it is.
Depends on where you go, though.
The world has turned. The internet era has desensitized everyone, I think, to immense violence, pornography, poop, etc.
Sometimes all in one
Yeah.
video.
Yeah. Sometimes involving two cups.
It's definitely a different world now. It's harder to shock people.
But it depends on where you go, though, because we had both Cannibal Corpse and Behemoth kicked out of Russia last year.
Yeah.
Right.
So you
That
never know.
Behemoth
And there's
story
still
was
like
scary.
some kind of hungover stuff in Germany, right? About old Cannibal
Yeah,
records.
Cannibal can only play certain songs there.
That's so weird.
Germany
Didn't
has
that
a-
get overturned.
Yeah.
Well, no, not all of it. Germany has this
No.
gigantic, thick phone book of stuff that's been banned there. Movies, music, everything. They're southern part of Germany's super conservative, so they can still. We can get away with some stuff there, but not everything. I mean, the last Rammstein record was not technically banned, but it was you had to buy it underneath the counter. It was 18 and over.
It's probably because was that the one that had pussy on it?
Yep.
That's probably
Yeah.
why.
Well, there was also other crazy lyrics on there too.
Oh, yeah,
so.
I'm sure.
No, that wasn't. That was the one after the one with pussy, actually.
Was it?
But they had some other really disturbing lyrics on there. So
Of course.
Till's
it's
always got
Rammstein.
some weird stuff
Oh,
going
yeah.
on. He had that Fish On video that he did with Peter Tactigren.
Yeah,
that
Peter
Lindemann
Tactigren, yeah,
solo
yeah.
project.
Weird. That was a really disturbing one.
Yeah.
But Trevor, when you signed to Metal Blade, before that whole thing, the Black Dahlia Murder was just another MySpace band. And coming from that world, when you get that first email, that first phone call, whatever it was, hey, it's Metal Blade Records, what was your reaction?
Immediate disbelief. Honestly, because
I imagine so,
we
yeah.
had tried to sell ourselves to the labels. We sent out packages that had demos and EPs and stuff, and we got all these rejection letters.
Sure.
like 30 of them about, and we had another contract in our hands. We had from Willowtip, and who's a label I love still
Really
to
good
this day,
label, yeah.
and so that was like a compliment enough at the time. We were pretty excited about that. And then, kind of after all the letters died down and stuff, you just like coincidentally happened upon us, I believe. And I want to say Faley was the first one to call, and like that was one of the things that didn't click right away because I didn't know who he was.
Well, I think
You know what I mean?
it was funny because Brian, I talked about this in the book actually, and Brian said he thought it was different. I remember I was trolling MySpace and just looking at stuff, and I saw a couple bands had this band, the Black Dahlia Murder, on there, and I was like, "Ooh, that's a really cool title. I'm gonna go listen to it." I listened to it. I go, "Oh, this is really good." So I emailed whatever your contact was there and said, "Hey, it's Brian from Metal Blade. I'd be interested in talking to you guys." Yada yada. I told Faley, and I think Faley was probably the one that called.
Yeah, following up probably.
But I'd sent the initial email, and it's funny because I've become really good friends with the Willowtip guys, especially because they're from Pittsburgh and we're both all big Penguins fans.
Yep.
I had no idea about that story that Trevor just told me. And one time, I was hanging out with Jason from Willowtip. I said, I like literally they had a contract in and you took them away from me. Like, oh, I'm so sorry, man. It's like, no, it's all right. It's all good. It's all good. Don't worry about it.
It was for the greater good. And,
Exactly.
I think there was a while where he was a little bit embittered, and but we're cool now. I talked to him a lot, actually.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, he's really cool.
Yeah, and you've had plenty of bands pinched from your label too by bigger labels.
This
So
is what
it's
happens,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
it happens to everybody, I'm sure.
But we try to not ever do it to anybody that has a contract with somebody. Like it's
Yeah,
a free
sure.
agency or something. It's one thing. But yeah, it's especially in the major days back. Not so much anymore, but in the major days, it happened a lot.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. You said you lost like 12 or 13
No,
bands
I think
in
it's
the
like
late
20
80s in one
yeah,
year.
20 something. All went to majors, and most of them all came back.
Yeah, one part of the book that really struck me was in the very, very early days, you're talking about how no matter which bands you had, just selling something like 10,000 albums was like jump on the table.
That was like platinum back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, pop the champagne, we made it. And it's weird because we are now, as an entire industry, back to that point where if bands are selling 10,000 copies, they're popping that champagne and going on tour. Power Trip, for example, they just put out this statement like, oh, thank you guys so much. We're so excited. We sold 12,000 copies of Nightmare Logic.
So somebody mentioned that and talking about the book where we're kind of back to that again now. It's just kind of interesting.
It is weird. Like, how do you take that? I mean, obviously, Metal Blade Records is never going to be a multi-platinum sort of label, no matter at what stage of the music industry. But is it weird going back to that time where you started?
Well, I don't know. The weird thing about it is, I mean, that's true on the physical sense, but now you have the streaming stuff is coming up and doing really well now. So it's all changing really quickly, and the money is still better than it used to be.
Yeah, you said
overall,
in the book you actually had quarters where your digital sales outpace your physical
It's that way
sales.
every month now.
Really?
Every month.
Crazy.
It's
and
crazy.
You didn't finish this book that long ago either.
I know. And we literally, day by day, if you look at the numbers day by day, they're better. Streaming numbers are better than the day before.
Yeah.
So it's really happening at a way quicker rate than I ever would have thought it to happen.
And a few stats you threw out at the end of the book is that the streaming is expected to increase tenfold by 2020, and digital album sales is going to pretty much drop off within a couple of years.
So they say, and it's still trending in that direction. So it's going to be interesting.
So do you feel like we're finally at the point where we're going to be recovering from the fallout of physical CD sales?
Well, I think the business overall already is recovered. If you're talking about, pop and hip hop, and the major labels are making,
Yeah, they're always going to be fine.
tons, but they're making tons of money. For a while they weren't. So, but I think it's trickling down to everybody now. So yeah, we're definitely getting in, and it's still going to take another year or so for the metal, but it's getting there real fast.
Now, Trevor, with the Black Dahlia murder, your entire career has pretty much been a byproduct of the internet, from getting signed from MySpace, and you've grown up really without knowing these huge album sales numbers and things like that. So what excites you the most about the streaming world and the direction that that's going?
Man, I just want music to get in people's ears, man. You know what I mean? It seems like a great opportunity for extreme bands to be discovered just on the basis of like the way the recommendations work and things like that. Yeah, man, we've existed in a whole time of change, basically. You know what I mean? I remember like talking about the physical copy, that it was going to be dead, and it was like, it seemed insane. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, we've just kind of been rolling with it, I guess, much in the way that you've always rolled with it. You know what I mean? Just adjusting to what's going on at the times, and kind of,
One thing I wanted to talk a little about is, throughout this book, you have all these testimonials from musicians about Brian, how basically you walk the line very wonderfully between being a boss and a friend to all these musicians. Trevor, I'm sure you can speak to this, but that must be
for sure.
a difficult line to walk in that sort of position.
I think it's real natural for you. It seems
for
like
you,
you
perhaps.
just do it.
I mean, look, honestly, it's music first, friendship second, and then all the business stuff third. Obviously, it plays a role in there, and you have to you do have to walk that line a little bit, and sometimes there's uncomfortable conversations you have to have. But for the most part, it's all about the music and being friends with everyone. We like to work with people that we're friends with, and we're super lucky that so many of the bands are that way, that we can hang out just as friends and not even worry about music and stuff.
Oh yeah, the label has a really family-oriented vibe, like knowing the staff there, lots of hugs, lots of drinks, lots of laughs, like within a family, you know what I mean, in a major way, and they've seen us grow up, literally.
Yeah, I saw a press shot of Black Dahlia Murder. It had to be from Unhallowed, and I was like, oh my God, they're so young.
That's the
Who are these guys, right?
That's a picture where I don't have a chin. I look like a thumb.
with the
got, like,
with
the
the
Beatles
Unleashed shirt.
haircut.
Yeah,
Got the super short hair.
Yeah. The Unleashed shirt got some mileage though. It canceled out my hair, I guess. That was good.
Now, having that kind of friendship role first before the business, as you said, that must make those difficult talks a little bit easier, because they know you're approaching it from a friend perspective, and
Yeah.
everyone understands it is business, but at least you have a little bit of a nice lean in one direction before you have to have that tough conversation.
Yeah, and I think we rarely ever get to that point, actually, just because the way we do things is like Turf said, it's a really big family. And I mean, you're going to have some times where you're not going to agree on everything. But for the most part, it's pretty easy. And we see that stuff coming way ahead of time. So I think we're all on the same page 95% of the time, probably. So, and even if there is a debate, it's not really an argument. It's more of a debate over something. But in the end, it's really whatever the artist wants. So for me, if I have an opinion about something, and we don't tell bands to play different songs a different way or go in a different direction. We just like, well, maybe this might be cool, that might be cool. We have an opinion, but it's ultimately up to them. So
Sure.
not much I can say. I'm not going to say, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Because not a lot of bands stay on one label for their entire career. It's like one quarterback trying to play for the same team in the NFL his entire career. Like, it just, no matter how hard you try, it just doesn't happen. But you've been able to buck that trend like pretty much the whole time, except the early days. Some of the like bands like Slayer getting pinched and picked up by major labels.
But we were a tiny little company at that point. So what are we going to do? Like, oh no, we have 5 people. The majors have 500. Stay with us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I grew up in the 70s and I was kind of all about artist development over all this time. And once we became a real label, it was like, that's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to develop artists and have them have long careers. And that's been the most important thing to us. So I think because we have that mentality, maybe that's one of the reasons why the bands have stayed for so long. And, it's friends and family and all that sort of stuff. So, and I'm super happy about, being able to work with all these bands for so long.
Definitely. And in the 90s, it was awesome that you said you just really refused to sign any new metal. And I think a lot of people are happy to hear that. Yeah. But what's it like, because you do have a business to run, as far as weighing between personal taste when signing a band and something that you may not like so much personally, but it's good for the business, it's good for the market?
Nope.
Won't do it.
Nope. Not going to happen. From day one, every time I've done this, has been because I like the band. And I want to work with them. Not ever going to do something, this trend is really big, so it's never going to do that. And we haven't done it. We didn't sign a lot of hair metal. We didn't sign new metal. There's, look, I like pretty much all of metal, and we have a pretty wide variety of artists on the roster. So I like a lot of stuff, but there's certain things that I just am not into, and if I'm not into it, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, so it doesn't represent the brand. So Metal Blade, absolutely 100% is Brian Slagel, nothing
Blame
else.
me. If you don't like a record or band on Metal Blade, it's my fault. I will completely take the blame.
Can I blame you for a Mercyful Fate album not coming out yet?
Please.
What's going on there? I talked to Hank Sherman when that Denner Sherman EP came out, because there's still one album left on their deal, correct?
I cannot confirm nor deny that. Ask your question again. I'm trying to think how to do it.
Have Mercyful Fate re-signed with Metal Blade?
I cannot confirm nor deny that.
Would Mercyful Fate like to sign with Metal Blade? Would Metal Blade like to put out
we do have one record left on the Mercyful Fate agreement. That is correct.
What are you getting at here? We got to ask this question in a different way.
This is my statement on Mercyful Fate right now.
All right.
Let me get my
make this clear and
professional
intelligible
voice
for everybody
out here. In regards to Mercyful Fate, there are no plans at present to do anything with Mercyful Fate, but I cannot confirm nor deny that there are talks happening.
All right.
How's that?
We'll take that. Okay. It's not a no. And
it's definitely not a no.
As a huge Mercyful Fate fan, that's
absolutely
good enough for me right
no.
now.
I can see the happiness on your face. It's genuine.
When I remember the first time I heard King Diamond's voice, I was 14, and I went out and I bought Abigail. I listened to nothing but Abigail for an entire week.
Yeah, are you kidding?
I listened to it 5-6 times a day for an entire week, and it's embedded in my brain. I was thrilled when he did that Abigail tour. And I got Don't Break the Oath from my parents for Christmas. One year, Christmas morning, I think I opened up Venom, Welcome to Hell, and Mercyful Fate, Don't Break the Oath.
Well, here's what I can say, just to even be vaguer about things. More vague. Incorrect English. So this King Diamond CD, DVD is finally going to come out in early 2018, it looks like.
Awesome.
Double CD, double DVD, outdoor show, indoor show, all professionally shot. All the audio will be in there, and it'll be up on streaming services, all that good stuff. Then sometime after that, King's working on a new record now, King Diamond. So that record's going to come out, best case scenario, late 2018. Maybe it might float into early 2019. King will tour all of 2019 for King Diamond. And then in 2020...
when he's 64 years old.
Then in 2020, there's gonna be some interesting things happening.
All right.
Jeez, all right, we gotta stick around for a while to make sure.
Yes, we all gotta. Yeah, tell me about it.
So, talking about trends, and it seems like with the internet, the trends have been shorter and shorter in their lifespans. And it's interesting, new metal seemed to take over a lot of the 90s, and then when the 2000s hit, I think metalcore was the big trend. And that's actually one that you jumped on immediately. Not jumping on the trend, but discovering bands like As I Lay Dying, who really, put that new genre of metal into motion. So when you started discovering those types of bands, what was it about those that style of music that excited you?
Well, it's just fresh. At that point, we'd kind of gone through the end of the 90s where metal's dead, it's dying,
Right.
It's not coming back. And we survived that. And then that was just fresh. And it had an air of the true traditional metal that I grew up with and I love, even though it was the hardcore vocals, and it was a mixture of both. And then we started talking to some of these bands. We found out they all loved, the Thin Lizzies and Iron Maidens and all this kind of stuff. Like, wow, you guys know about those bands? You weren't even born then. And like, yeah, we're totally into it. So all that freshness, and then meeting the bands, it was everybody's kind of one for all sort of scene, which I love. That kind of reminded me of where it was in the 80s when stuff came out. It was like, we're all in this for the betterment of everybody. And the whole vibe I just thought was really great. And I thought the bands and the music was really good as well.
Sure. And there has been rumblings of Tim Lambestis possibly restarting As They Lay Dying. So having been on your label for such a long time, let's say if he was to do that, would Metal Blade be open to being his home once again?
I mean, we're always open to anything. There's a lot of other issues surrounding that whole thing.
Well, sure.
That I have no control over. So, look, if it all works out in the end, sure, why not? I mean,
Yeah.
but a lot of things have to play out for all of that stuff to get there. But, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I think, he, in my opinion, he's done his time. Those events were sad, but he did his time. I feel like he should be able to make music now.
I think everybody is given a second chance, especially in this society these days. So
Yeah, I would hope so. So, then going beyond metalcore, obviously, then was deathcore again, which you helped propel into the scene.
Getting in on the ground floor.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, smart.
Yeah.
Job for a Cowboy,
Job for a
Whitechapel.
Cowboy,
Yeah.
like right when that hit, another
Blazing
band
the trails.
another band like Black Dahlia Murder that just kind of exploded on MySpace. And
Well, they were really,
they are.
though, they were kind of part of the metal. I mean, they weren't really there, but they were kind of part of the metalcore scene, because that was when I first heard about it, was through all the other metalcore bands.
definitely on the fringe of it. I
It
would
was
say.
super
where
fringe
we,
of it. I
we
never
played,
thought
honestly, was when we started out, was like metalcore shows. That was the big thing. There was so much
all
metal
the tours you did were all metalcore
creeping
tours.
over into hardcore at the time, and there was really no death metal scene that I could locate in Detroit at the time, so we kind of were like married into playing those shows, and that's how it all
Yeah.
started.
And it worked because Black Dahlia Murder has a ton of melody. Like, it all goes back to At the Gates, Slaughter of
for
the Soul.
sure, man, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, yeah. Didn't everything from that whole time
Yeah.
period, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing that attracted me to the Black Dahlia Murder, was that it had that heavier edge, that darker edge that I wanted. The metalcore thing, I was kind of like, okay, I can feel this, but then bands like the Black Dahlia Murder had that real sinister edge that I just didn't feel with some of those other bands. So I mean, growing up in that, I guess that scene. Is that something that you heard a lot, or is that something you wanted to inject?
Definitely when we started. To me, it's always been a death metal band. I don't even know what to call it now. People call it so many different things.
I wouldn't know what to call it.
It's Black Dahlia Murder.
Pretty much,
That's all
that's what
it
I've
is.
realized, and that's absolutely fine, with me. But, it started out being tagged with metalcore. I think a lot of it was just the records that were coming out parallel at the time. And, we were on Ozfest, and that put us in a spotlight with the second record, where we started getting a lot of press alongside bands like Killswitch Engage and stuff. And we had short hair too, so people had made their assumptions or whatever. But I think being an oddball band is why we're still around. Actually, we've been able to survive different trends that we've been called. You know what I mean? And deathcore came after that. People were calling us deathcore. You know what I mean? But we preceded that by a long time. I want to say.
Yeah, that
you know
doesn't
what I
make
mean?
any sense.
Yeah.
And that's more like a subwoofer, low end, low string kind of thing to me.
Yeah, yeah.
But like I said, man, people have called us a billion things, and every time we're online, there's a genre fight that ensues afterwards. But it's been sick, actually. You know, I think it's made the room full. You know, like there's all different walks of people out there in the crowd at a BDM show, and so it's awesome.
What do you call a part death metal, part metalcore band that's also funny?
Well, see that's one, you know, bands like Black Dahlia, and you know, any band that is going to be successful over the long period of time is doing something that's a little bit different from everybody else.
Sure.
And you know, they have their own sound, and it's funny. I would say, of all the demos we get in the last 4 or 5 years, we get more bands that try to sound exactly like them than anybody else. And it's like, that's, you know, as a bummer it is for us. Like, we already have Black Dahlia Murder, but it's a tribute to them that so many bands are so influenced by them that literally the sound is the same thing. And I always tell bands, it's great to like be influenced by people, but don't try to sound like them.
Yeah, and there seems like there's a lot of that going on today where kids will start a band and they just want to imitate everything to the T, and it's like, how about you take some of that, some of that, some of that,
and now,
create your own recipe, make your own soup.
You can record yourself pretty cheaply, so there's no like, you know, filter at all. Like any band can drop something, you know what I mean, and put it on Bandcamp, for example, which is a, you know, great outlet for that kind of thing. Yeah, I love Bandcamp. But when you don't have a label, you know, that's a pretty good place to start. So you have tons of bands that are like bedroom bands getting out there and Pro Tools bands, and it's a very saturated time right now.
Yeah, like every local scene, I'm sure everybody listening has a friend's band that they've put out 4 or 5 albums on their own by now, and it's you don't have to just pony up the money to get a demo recorded, make your songs as tight as possible, because that studio time really means something. You could write 1 million songs and just keep pumping out stuff.
And you either catch up in real life and learn how to play it or not.
There's that problem too.
I also think that's prevented there from being a lot of great bands.
True.
Because it used to be, you know, all the good musicians would eventually kind of come together to form one band. And now it's just so easy for one good musician to just have a bunch of his friends or other people he knows make a demo or a record and put it out, like I said, on Bandcamp or whatever it is. And it's there. And by the time they kind of figure out, like, oh, maybe I should be with better guys, it just doesn't really happen. And that's why one of the reasons why I think it's so hard now. There's just so many bands, and you don't get that. You know, like Whitechapel is a great example of a band, you know, coming from Knoxville, Tennessee, in the middle of nowhere. Sure. And the reason they were so good is because there wasn't any scene there, nothing happening. So eventually, the few good musicians there were there all got into one band, and they, you know, there you go.
Yeah, and now today, like everybody's just a bedroom shredder. Like it seems like once Necrophag just released Epitaph, all of a sudden everybody was just sweeping and playing all this neoclassical stuff out of nowhere.
You think about all the youth that have come into heavy music since the Pro Tools era. They've heard mostly perfect albums, you know, to the click, like right on. And they're learning how to play music to that. They're, you know, so like that's just a huge part of the fabric, you know what I mean, is clinical, you know.
Yeah, because it's very mechanical.
Right.
It's not what you want.
We had a really interesting conversation with Paul Mazurkiewicz about a year ago, a drummer from Cannibal Corpse, and how he never used a click. And then I think it was Eric Rutan who had him play into a click, and he's like, I had to kind of learn my drumming style all over again. And he implements the click, he said, for now a couple tracks live, and he's gotten used to playing it and switched it up. But like you listen to those Cannibal records and the old ones, and it's all a little unhinged, you know. So
that was what was cool, though.
Yeah, that's what's great about it. It's supposed to be unhinged.
The first BDM record, too, you know, we click was not at all in our life, and you know, you just changed speeds when you wanted to, however you wanted to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just if it felt right, basically.
Yeah. Well, that's the genius of like Dave Lombardo, who I think is my favorite metal drummer of all time.
He's got the best.
Dave
finesse.
never played to a click, at least when we worked with him, and he was always just a little off. I mean, not that, you know, I mean, his drumming was perfect, but he couldn't play to a click because it's just a little off. But that's what the genius was. And why it was so hard when Paul Bostaff came into the band to really, like, I would always miss Dave when they played the old stuff. But to Paul's credit, when he came back in this last time, I saw them and I was like, wow, actually the first time I didn't really miss Dave that much. And I told Kerry afterwards, he said, yeah, Paul sat down for like 6 months and listened to all the old Slayer stuff, the way Dave played it in headphones, and learned how to play those songs like Dave played it, which is just
a little more unhinged.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, just a hair off.
And that's what adds, for at least for me, like the kind of the feral element to extreme metal is it's not perfect. Well, yeah, it's not supposed to be. Like you listen to Autopsy.
Oh yeah, well you know,
Rightford's
a lot of it I think it's just been the ease of this era.
Yep.
And the skipping of the drum recording, especially, I think is the first go-to and the first thing to go wrong too. But I think that is one of the things, like first corners cut in this era. You know what I mean? Especially in like the world of metalcore and stuff like that. There's so much like just programmed drums out there.
Yeah.
I agree. Like when you're listening to metal, do you want a straight, flat, smooth ride, or do you want a rocking ship that goes with the tide?
I want to ride
that's
the
the
mean
thing.
streak, the wooden roller coaster at Cedar Point that breaks your spine.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think roller coasters, to me, an analogy for an album or song is always a roller coaster. You want ups and downs, and you want to be taken on a ride. You don't want it just to be like some static, non-feeling sort of thing.
Right. But that's the thing. You can throw as many loops and as many twists and corkscrews into a nice roller coaster you can, but it's still not as terrifying as the rickety old wooden roller coasters where you feel like it's going to break at any moment.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
the thrill of it. And that's I
That's
think,
a definite good analogy for that Slayer feel. Just like
yes.
flying off the rails,
Yeah.
train
100%.
style.
Like Graham, you always talk about the cliffhanger drum fill that Lombardo does.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
him
like one of your
just-
favorite things ever.
I love Dave Lombardo so much. The way that
Smart
he
man.
hits his snare with malevolent intent is what I love about Dave Lombardo, and how you can just feel like evil coming out of his hand.
Well, I'll always have this picture of Dave Lombardo in my head forever. We were making Show No Mercy. And we had no money back then, and we had to do it really quickly, and we were recording, and they wanted to record all of it kind of live. Studio wasn't very big, so we didn't have a lot of room for Dave. And Dave had a big drum set, we didn't have a lot of room for it. So the cymbals were bleeding into every mic, and it was a big mess. So the engineer decides, like, okay, we're going to have to do this without recording the cymbals.
I remember hearing that, yeah.
And like, we're like, really? So
That's so bizarre.
So Dave did it. It's not that hard to do when you're playing the drums, but overdubbing the cymbals, like I said, I'll never forget him. He's just standing there with his sticks at his side, like waiting to hit the and the hi-hat. It was hysterical. But you would never know that if you didn't know the story, because it sounds so fluid and amazing. But
It's a testament to him as a drummer.
oh my God, that's hard to do.
And Gene Hoglan had to hold his actual kit together during one of those early recordings because they were flying away from Dave because he's double blasting so much.
Well, Gene was a funny story too. When we were recording, it might have been Show No Mercy or Haunted the Chapel, I don't remember. But Gene was just hanging out in the studio. Nobody really was sure why he was there.
Oh, that's a great part of the book.
I was like, what? We're not, because he kind of knew some people, but I think he initially knew somebody that worked at the studio, and he just wanted to hang out. And obviously became friends with everybody, and obviously one of the best metal drummers
He's
ever.
just
But
such a pleasant man. That
I ended up talking to him one day, and it was like, I don't know, he's 16 or something at the time. And I was talking to him for a while. I was like, oh, this kid's really cool. I went in the studio. I go, who is that kid out there? Like, we don't know. Like, wait a minute, is there some kid just hanging out
Thought he
in
was
there?
with you.
Yeah.
And he ended up being the guy who taught Dave Lombardo how to hit that double kick.
There you go.
How about that?
Yeah.
One thing we were talking about before you came in was how there are really no extreme metal records that have gotten gold or platinum certifications. I think Slayer's Rain and Blood just got certified gold, which is insane to think that.
Which probably will
Especially-
change with all the streaming rules now.
I
But
hope-
for now,
I think the Slayer stuff is, I think they've got more than just one that's that
Okay.
way now. I think there's a few, but you're still right.
Yeah, it just happened with Rain and Blood. So
Yeah.
that's unbelievable, especially when Metallica have sold, 16 million Black Albums or
more
whatever.
More
copies
than
of the
that
Black
now,
Album
probably.
every week than most metal bands.
That's unbelievable.
It's insane how that thing keeps going like that.
It is crazy.
The whole catalog is like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, true.
They're just that unicorn band, you know?
Yep.
So in Metal Blade Records history, 35 years, what is the highest selling album that you've ever put out?
You ready for this?
I know what
Oh.
it is.
Goo Goo Dolls.
Oh, that's right.
We were talking about the
Back
Google
when
Dolls
they
thing
were an
before this
actual
too.
rock
Before he
band.
came in.
Yes. Right when they got huge, basically.
Gee, so which Goo Goo Dolls album
Dude,
was
the one
it?
that broke out.
the one that broke out,
man.
a boy named Goo. I think it's double platinum now, maybe, or something.
Jeez.
All right.
Well,
so
what
aside
was-
from the
So
Google
aside
Dolls,
from the Goo Goo Dolls, it would be Show No Mercy and Hell Awaits. They're both pretty similar at this
Yeah,
point.
makes sense.
And then maybe Amon Amarth's kind of creeping up a little bit behind
they're
them.
doing really,
Amon's
really
doing
well.
Those As I Lay Dying, I think some of those have done a quarter million.
Those did pretty well.
Those did well for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, Cannibal, Black Dahlia. We have a whole slew of bands, Guar, that nobody's had a platinum or a gold record of one specific record, but you look at over the course of time, they've all sold lot of records. I mean, Cannibal sold like almost 3 million records at this point in their history, which is crazy.
Yes, for a band like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, those
And
damn
now that,
Goo Goo
and they
Dolls.
do well on the charts. Cannibal do well on the charts. now,
Another
too.
one that people don't remember that's it's definitely in the top 10 probably all-time Metal Blade records if we put like the albums sold. 6 Feet Under. It was either Max. Yeah, I think it was Maximum Violence. That was when that record came out. And I forget what the correlating Cannibal record was, but 6 Feet was selling twice as much as Cannibal. I think it was like almost 300,000 copies in the U.S. or something.
Didn't that record like keep you guys afloat for a minute there? Wasn't that during the dark times?
Well, the dark times weren't that dark though. This is what I try to explain to people. Like everybody goes, "Oh, the '90s was dead." The underground was doing great. I mean, we had 6 Feet, we had Cannibal, we had Guar, we had King Diamond, we had Mercyful Fate. Like all these bands were selling really good amounts of records, just nothing mainstream.
Yeah.
But you weren't selling 1 million albums in the 80s, so it's not like you had that steep drop off the cliff when metal kind of disappeared a little bit in the 90s. You had to maintain pace.
We did find in the 90s. I mean, certainly it helped to have a little extra Goo Goo Dolls money to buffer it a little bit. But still, I mean, all those records did really, really well. So for us, people look back and I encourage people to go back and listen to a lot of records. And I think that kind of 94 to 2000 era, people just don't go back and listen to that. I mean, like the King Diamond and Mercyful Fate stuff we did back then, I think was awesome. And one of my favorite things now is I'll go to a King Diamond show and people say, "Man, I just discovered Voodoo. It's so good. I never realized how great that record was."
My first, man.
Yeah.
So good. I love it.
So, it's people kind of rediscovering that stuff now because it's like, it's the 90s. It all sucked. Yeah. Metal was dead. Nothing was good there. It's like, wait a minute. There's a lot of good stuff there.
Especially like, I don't know. I love going through a band's catalog and kind of digging into their more maligned albums because when you love a band so much, it's about you love the players in the band and you want to hear what kind of music they're able to create. And when they're in the mid 90s, they're like, what do we kind of do here? So it's interesting to see a band that might be a little bit, I don't want to say at their worst, but maybe just a little lost or misguided. Or like even you said, like your first introduction to King Diamond was The Graveyard. Mm-hmm. And that's a really different album for King. It's got a lot of slower songs on there, a little bit of a different pace, but I still find it fascinating. Or even like Celtic Frost, Cold Lake.
I mean, there's tons. Like then like you have like mid 90s, every Swedish death metal band starting to like inject rock. And you have like these grooves coming in to a lot of bands at the time that would like precede new metal kind of in a way.
That was weird. This when all those bands like Paradise Lost and In Flames took these crazy turns. Kind of like wait, because we did the early Paradise Lost stuff here, and then when they kind of took that turn, I was like, yeah.
Or like
I don't know that I got it at that point.
Like in tune with to ride straight, to shoot
exactly,
straight and speak the truth.
Getting at. Yeah, definitely.
I can never remember the name of that.
You had a lot of bands just going that route. Dismember got weird then. Grave went down that Wolverine blues path kind of a little bit.
Yeah. So Brian, what's the record you're most proud of having released with Metal Blade?
Yeah, it's always a tough question, but I think there's one, and it's hard to say, but I think the one for me, I mean, there's a couple of them. I mean, just the first album is crazy. Just the fact that I actually put out a record when I was 21 years old, didn't know what I was doing. But doing it, Armored Saint Symbol of Salvation was a really important record for me because the band was really great friends of ours. They grew up. They were the first band ever signed to a major label and really gave us a lot of publicity talking about, this label they came from. Really great friends of mine forever. And then when the guitar player passed away, Dave Pritchard, they had kind of broken up. They were done with Chrysalis. They were kind of broken up. They were sick of the whole thing. And they're like, we're just going to move on and do whatever. But they made all these amazing demos while Dave was still alive. And I went to them. I go, you can't let this music die. We have to do something with it. It's way before the internet and anything else when, So making Symbol of Salvation, getting Dave Jurin, who did Alice in Chains and James Addiction, to produce it, and Q Prime managed them. It's kind of they got a second chance at life, and that record got a second chance at life and did really well. So just the whole process surrounding that was probably the one record I have to pick.
Yeah, and that's one of the emotional stories in the book too.
Yeah,
that I really enjoyed. Now,
cool.
Trevor, don't pick your own here, your own band. Your favorite Metal Blade release?
The Bleeding, no doubt. For me, coming into Metal Blade was like right, when you guys were putting out a ton of death metal and blazing a trail in that way, and so to me it's like it's an important death metal label to me in that way. Broken Hope and Cannibal Corpse ruled my world as a kid. All that gore, loved it.
Yeah. Bleeding's probably my favorite Cannibal Corpse record.
I will tell you my favorite Black Dahlia Murder record, though, just to be controversial. Yeah. Unhallowed.
I would agree.
Only because I heard the demo and we signed them, and I thought the band was really cool, but I didn't expect that. And I was obsessed with that record for the first month I got it. I just played it every day,
That's cool.
24
I remember
hours a day.
handing it to you and feeling
God.
like, man, I don't know if we did this right.
No. Oh my God, did you do it right? I was still to this day.
What were you apprehensive about?
I mean, we were young. Honestly, a lot of what we were trying to do, like playing wise, was a stretch for us at the time. You know what I mean? Like really cutting our teeth at playing technical stuff. And you can hear the sloppiness. You can hear the youth there. There's no click. It's pretty raw. And I don't know. I guess the energy did come across, though.
And I just thought, I thought songwriting wise, I mean, for young kids, I mean, some of those riffs are just, I mean, that's like classic historical riffs for me. I mean, some of that stuff is like Funeral Thirst. Oh my God, that's still one of my favorite songs,
especially for a debut. Like,
yes,
immediately.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, hold on a second.
And that song will be around for sure. I mean, we can't get away from that one.
Yeah,
but I don't mind. I like it.
And something I love about young bands, like I've talked to the guys in Suffocation. It's like your song structures are just so insane. Your arrangements, and they're like, yeah, well, we were young. We were just throwing any riff we had together against the other one. So like now we know a little bit more about songwriting. But I was like, no, like be weird. Just do all that weird off kilter stuff. And that's what I love about hearing a band's first album. There's always like the elitist of like, oh, the first album, and I prefer the demos, but like that whole mentality. But you really get to hear where you're coming from and just no preconceived notions about songwriting. Like you guys just go for it.
Well, there's no outside voices or forces, because once you become successful, kind of that innocence is gone, and you've got everybody out
pressure
there
on
saying,
you to write quickly. The first record you put out is like a best of everything you've had to that point, so it's different than having to respond with a blank slate. You know what I mean?
And the problem that a lot of bands get into is they listen to those outside forces. And you talk to any major band, they make music for themselves. Like whether it's Metallica or Guns N' Roses or Black Dahlia, pick Cannibal, anybody. It's like you make it for yourselves, and if everybody else likes it, that's great. But if once you start to, somebody's influencing you, saying, oh, you should sound like this now, or
if we just did this,
that's when it's over.
Here's what's possible
you should
for the
get
band.
a DJ.
No.
All right. Well, that does it for all the time that we have here today. Brian, we want to thank you so much for coming in. You're one of the most important men in the history of heavy metal.
Oh, thanks.
So
man.
for the sake of Heaviness, out now, history, 35 years of Metal Blade. And then Trevor, thank you as well. And we've got a new album coming out from Black Dahlia Murder, Nightbringers, October 6th.
That is correct, my friend. Thanks for having us.
Oh, yeah. Out on, you guessed it, Metal Blade.
That's right.
So, can we see Black Dahlia Murder on tour pretty soon? Where can we catch
betcha.
ya?
We'll be going around with Suffo around the states, celebrating the Nightbringers with Exhumed on some dates, Wormwitch opening, Necrot, one of my favorite Bay Area Deathsters, got them on the bill, and Decrepit Birth. In the wake of their brand new album, which is disgusting. So the lineup is thoroughly awesome, and
it's
very happy about that. So come check it out.
Thanks for coming in, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. There was your Loudwire all-inclusive 2-for-1 episode. Trevor Strnad, Brian Slagel.
Great tagline for this podcast, Graham.
Thank you.
The 2-for-1, all-inclusive, who's a what you get you special.
A very nerdy discussion, which we always appreciate.
Isn't it the best just talking about Dave Lombardo's drumming?
You know what? I really don't do it enough, even though I do it almost every day.
It is a living, and we still cannot talk about that guy's playing enough. We had Thomas Haka on here on the podcast from Meshuggah. We debated the best thrash drummer. It was actually between Gene Hoglan and Dave Lombardo. Both those guys came up in the same conversation. I'm sure we could have gone down that route all over again. But if you want to, you should definitely check out that podcast too.
Yeah, for sure. So the Goo Goo Dolls. The Goo Goo Dolls.
That is the obvious answer, and I don't even know why we didn't think of it.
Well, it's because it's not a metal band.
Yeah,
and
but we knew the Goo Goo Dolls were on Metal Blade.
I did know that, but why would I keep that information in my brain if I don't care about it?
Because you just read the book, Graham.
I know, but it's still, like, if it's not metal, if it's not a band that I like, an artist that I like, it goes immediately out of my brain.
Yeah, I'm going to forget it once we leave this studio.
Yeah.
So we met Brian briefly when we were at Chicago Open Air. Just very light conversation, real quick. So this is the first time that we've had a chance to actually sit down and have an at-length conversation with him.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy just hearing all these stories about Brian Slagel over the years and just all these testimonials you hear from everybody in the industry, all these bands, and how much they love the guy. Even James Hetfield can't thank the guy enough for pretty much being responsible for where Metallica are today. I mean, they did a lot of the work themselves too. Let's not pretend like they didn't write Master of Puppets here.
Yeah.
But I completely understand what everybody's talking about. And especially when I was asking him the question about, have you ever signed something? Well, this is a good business move. It's not my favorite. And he was just shaking his head no as I'm talking. And that to me said exactly what everybody needs to know about Brian Slagel.
Yeah. Immediately said no.
I was also expecting Trevor to hesitate a little bit there on his favorite Metal Blade release, but boom, Cannibal Corpse bleeding instantly.
It's a hard one to argue
That
with.
guy probably knows more about death metal than anyone on this planet that's ever lived. So for him to just pick a favorite like that, I mean, yeah, it's a sick album.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Loudwire podcast. Make sure you go to loudwire.com for all your daily rock and metal news. Hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter. Give us a subscription on iTunes. Hit that subscribe button. Leave us 5 stars and a comment if you'd be so kind. Subscribe to us on YouTube. You can follow me, Graham, at GrahamWire.
And you can follow me, Joe, at Ice Nerve Shatter. And that's on Instagram. It is on Twitter too, but I don't do anything on there. So follow me if you don't want your news feed to get clogged up.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
And don't forget, as always, play Duke.